Ever seen someone taking off an RC tailwheel who jams their throttle forward, doesn't touch a single flight control, and prays they somehow end up airborne safely? Or maybe the infamous all-money and no-skill Terry who nearly crashes his giant-scale warbird on every takeoff? We want to do our best here at Tail Heavy Productions to introduce the proper procedures for taking off RC tailwheel airplanes in order to prevent those unnecessary ground loops and crashes on takeoff. In this video, we will review the basics of tailwheel ground handling, or lack thereof, and walk through the standard takeoff procedures for any tailwheel. We'll also tease some advanced tailwheel techniques for use while maneuvering on the ground. Before we get started, remember, don't let tailwheels intimidate you. Learning to fly them properly will make you an all-around better pilot, even with nose draggers. Let's plug in our flight packs and start with Tailwheel Ground Operations 101. First, unlike with a tricycle gear, in tailwheels, your center of gravity is behind your main landing gear. Ever tried to push a shopping cart backwards? Tailwheels on the ground function similarly. They are dynamically unstable. Let's say you want to make a turn while taxiing. With a tailwheel, when you start a turn, your forward momentum will cause the plane to want to keep going faster and faster in the direction you applied input, even if you neutralize the rudder. In some cases, it'll keep going even with opposite rudder at higher or even full power settings. With a nose gear, you could neutralize the rudder to stop a turn on the ground. This won't work with a tailwheel. Another way to think of how to retain directional control and not let inertia take control of your airplane is to not let the tailwheel go outside the width of the main landing gear. Dance on that rudder. The second tailwheel ground ops topic is that the wing on a tailwheel aircraft produces lift anytime there is some amount of forward airspeed while taxiing. Ever heard of angle of attack, or AOA? AOA is the angle between the relative wind and the chord line of the wing, and is a direct measure of total lift being created. A tailwheel's wing naturally has a higher AOA while in taxi than their nosewheel counterparts. What's important here is that you take caution when taxiing a tailwheel at higher speed. Your plane can become airborne quicker than you'd think. We'll touch more on AOA in a later video. The third important tailwheel ground ops topic is holding up elevator or back pressure while taxiing. This is crucial because back pressure translates to downforce on your tail and tailwheel to ensure proper directional control in taxi. There are some exceptions to this rule for tailwinds, but we'll cover this in another video. Alright, hopefully after reviewing these three tailwheel ground ops topics, you aren't left thinking that tailwheels are the Darth Vader of airplanes when it comes to taxiing. To some, you may have even been left with the conclusion that it's smartest to use less rudder on a tailwheel to avoid over-controlling. This is far from true. Tailwheels, by design, sometimes require large inputs of rudder to maintain directional control on the ground. What really will bite you isn't using too much rudder, but rather holding rudder input in any given direction for too long. Make sure you take your turn slowly on the ground and keep that up elevator applied. Never stop salsa dancing with that rudder. Now it's time to dive into our main entree, taking off tailwheels. For the purposes of these explanations, assume the winds are calm. We will cover crosswind takeoffs in a later video. Tailwheels can be taken off in two ways: raising the tail before getting to a flying speed, or keeping the tail on the ground and flying off from there. First up, tail up takeoffs. Let's start the scenario by getting your airplane lined up on the runway on centerline while keeping your elevator fully up. Maintaining centerline is not commonly taught in the RC community, but the more you hold yourself to it, the better your stick and rudder skills will become. Begin your takeoff roll by smoothly but quickly bringing in full throttle. Oxymoron, we know. In the full-scale world, most tailwheels take some time to get up to an airspeed that will allow their tail to come up and begin flying. Aside from heavier scale planes as an example, in the RC world, most of our airplanes are light and have an insane amount of excess thrust. This gives them an abnormally high power-to-weight ratio, so their tail will be able to come up practically right away. As airspeed increases to a speed that will allow the tail to come up, gently apply down elevator, aka forward pressure, to raise it. Keep that tail up and hold in enough forward pressure while accelerating to keep your landing gear pinned to the runway and airplane in a level flight or slightly nose-low attitude in case of unexpected crosswinds. When your tail can come up will vary from plane to plane, but you'll figure out the timing of this with practice. At the same time in speed, the rudder also becomes effective. Keep dancing with it. As we transition from the tailwheel on the runway into the entire tail section being lifted off the ground, we are changing from mechanical steering from the tailwheel to aerodynamic steering from the rudder. Therefore, it's important to raise the tail at a high enough speed so your rudder has enough air over it to give you ample directional control. As a quick fun fact, throughout the start of your takeoff roll, you may notice the plane wanting to pull left a bit. This is caused by the left turning tendencies. Also, raising the tail induces a fancy term called gyroscopic precession. We attached a link below for more info on these topics for those curious. The takeaway from all this is that when you feel the nose wanting to turn left, simply apply opposite or right rudder as needed to counteract the forces. Back to the takeoff. Continue to hold forward pressure and dance with your rudder to maintain your center line. Once you're clearly at a takeoff speed, gently relieve your forward pressure and translate it into neutral and then a slight amount of back pressure, aka up elevator. The final product here should be a graceful departure from Earth. All done. A couple quick notes here about this style of takeoff. First, the smaller and lighter an RC plane gets, the harder it becomes to utilize this takeoff style. Here's why. Some lighter park flyers end up flipping over on takeoff if you try to apply any amount of forward pressure, especially when flying off of grass. Therefore, tail-up takeoffs are best utilized by larger and heavier aircraft with higher wing loadings. In other words, the planes that don't flip over easily on the grass and don't have the power-to-weight ratio to take off in a foot. Using this technique will ensure heavier planes get up to a safe airspeed before taking off. You still can do tail-up takeoffs with small and light RC planes. It's fun. On that note though, one of our favorite ways to do tail-up takeoffs is by taking off our airplanes of all sizes at reduced power settings. This requires you to stay more on top of the airplane because your power to weight is now closer to what a full-scale airplane would have. This will in turn increase your ground roll and is excellent for your stick and rudder practice. Give it a shot. Now that we're done with the nitty and gritty of tail-up takeoffs, let's touch on some of the common errors you'll potentially run into while learning them. First up, jam and pray. What does this mean? Being lined up for takeoff, jamming your throttle all the way to full, and letting the plane fly you. This is never a good idea, and it can easily result in a ground loop or a flight into innocent bystanders, among many other potentially unsafe outcomes. Always be in control of your airplane. Second, not giving enough forward pressure to keep the mains planted while you gain airspeed to take off. This results in a lack of directional control in case of unexpected crosswinds. We know, it feels wrong to give down elevator anywhere near the ground, but it's right. Don't skip off the runway. Maintain the required forward pressure. It won't be a lot, but you'll know it's the right amount of forward pressure because your plane will be rolling down the runway in a level or even slightly nose-low attitude. Third up, not dancing with or using your rudder. The best full-scale tailwheel instructors we've ever learned from would never stop going on about the importance of this one. Flying a tailwheel is like climbing a tree. Don't get too comfortable or you'll fall out. Never let the airplane fly you. Avoid Soviet Russia. Keep that thumb dancing. The fourth and final common error is not holding up elevator at the start of your takeoff roll and leaving it neutral. The beginning of a takeoff is the worst possible time to not have proper control of your tailwheel. At this phase of your takeoff, you may not have enough rudder authority from the prop wash alone over your rudder to prevent a loss of directional control or ground loop. Maintain back pressure on your elevator until you've gained enough airspeed to raise the tail. Let's move on to our final type of takeoff, taking off with the tail on the ground throughout the entire ground roll. This takeoff will start the same way as before, getting the plane on the runway, aligned with the center line, and keeping your elevator fully up. Begin the takeoff roll by applying full throttle, oxymoron style, smoothly but quickly. While accelerating, keep your elevator up and dance with your rudder to maintain your center line. As your airspeed increases, so too will the effectiveness of your elevator. To prevent both an unnecessary amount of aerodynamic drag and excessive downforce on your tail from holding full up elevator, gradually decrease your back pressure as you're accelerating. Once your wing reaches a happy angle of attack, plan for a graceful departure from Earth yet again. That's all there is to it. So what type of planes would prefer this takeoff style? Lighter park flyers to prevent front flips, as we discussed before, anything STOL or bush flying related, or even planes with big props that don't have ample prop clearance and a tail-up attitude, to name a few. Tail-down takeoffs generally do get you airborne quicker. This style of takeoff is also the easier of the two we've looked at. It's also better suited for beginners. This is because it requires less intense stick and rudder work. In time, you'll be able to work your way up to progressing into tail-up takeoffs with the lighter birds, but starting with tail-down takeoffs will get you airborne successfully much quicker. There are a few common errors with tail-down takeoffs to be aware of. Two of them are shared with tail-up takeoffs: jam and pray and not dancing with your rudder. However, there is a common error that's specific to tail-down takeoffs: keeping the elevator fully up for the entire takeoff roll. The most common planes we see guilty of this error are giant-scale 3D planes with large control surfaces. Ever watch a 3D pilot take off holding full up elevator? Did you notice how long their takeoff roll was despite their 2-to-1 power-to-weight ratio? Here's what caused the long takeoff roll. 1. An increase in rolling friction on the tailwheel via a high amount of downforce from the full-up elevator. And 2. The aerodynamic drag from the prop wash and forward airspeed hitting the massive elevator surface that's deflected fully up in the airstream. It's not a good idea to hold the elevator fully up for the entirety of a takeoff on any type of airplane. What could happen if you do, aside from a longer takeoff roll? Unexpectedly leaping into the air quicker than hitting a speed bump at a breakneck speed. If you aren't expecting the leap, it could result in a dicey scenario. To prevent the leap, relieve your back pressure as you gain airspeed on the takeoff roll to gradually unload the tail. That way, once your wing is ready to fly, your tail won't be mercilessly chained to the runway. That's it for our rundown on tailwheel, ground ops, and takeoffs. For some inspiration, here's a quick montage of some fun things you can do with a tailwheel on the ground beyond just a normal taxi and takeoff. Stay tuned for more videos going over the how-tos of these fun maneuvers. We hope you enjoyed the topics discussed in this video and that you learned something from them. Feel free to rewatch any segment to ensure you're properly prepped before going out and practicing. What goes up must come down, so stay tuned for the tailwheel landings video as well. If you've enjoyed this video, dance with your rudder and hit that like button. If you want to guarantee a graceful departure from Earth on your next tail up takeoff, maybe even hit that subscribe button. See you next time with a new upload.